But when the practice is started, one must press on from the obvious to the profound, from the coarse to the fine. Everything depends on there being no interruption. The beginning and the end of the practice must be one. In between, there are cooler and warmer moments. That goes without saying. But the goal must be to reach the vastness of heaven and the depth of the sea, so that all methods seem quite easy and taken for granted. Only then have we mastered it. That sounds like a lot of work. And it is, I think. But the end, as Herb said beautifully earlier, one moment, 1 second in the presence of God is worth everything else. And that's where we're headed in meditation. Consciousness of the present.
Remember, meditation is attunement, and the expression from the coarse to the fine is used here. And I think many times we may pursue our meditation diligently, and yet still not in the rest of our lives moving from coarse adjustment to fine adjustment. We try to do the fine adjustment thing in meditation and have the coarsest of other kinds of experiences that are working against that. So it's not just the 15 minutes, but what we do in the other 23 hours and 45 minutes with respect to coarse adjustment and fine adjustment. And these should be with respect to our own notions. The readings are very strong about that. Do that which prepares you to your own conscience, not what someone else would require of you. Now, it's not a list of rules, but it's a sense of working within yourself to make the adjustments that enhance that the real attuning that can take place in the 15 minutes. All holy men have bequeathed this to one another. Nothing is possible without contemplation. When Confucius says perceiving brings one to the goal, or when the Buddha calls it the vision of the heart, our Lotsa says inner vision, it is all the same.
Anyone can talk about reflection, but he cannot master it if he does not know what the word means. What has to be reversed by reflection is the self-conscious heart, which has to direct itself towards that point where the formative spirit is not yet manifest. Here's a beautiful sentence. Within our 6-foot body, we must strive for the form which existed before the laying down of heaven and earth. I think that there he is saying exactly what Edgar Cayce said about the soul that was created by God long before the earth came into being. And it is this soul that we really are, the real being, the form that we were, the spiritual form in the image of God. I like to think of the soul having components, because we're in 3 dimensions, a part of the divine mind, a part of the divine will, choice, and a part of the divine spirit or life force. And we existed as spiritual beings long before the earth came. And then it came and its evolution was going on and we came down. And so I think it's saying to us here, within our 6-foot body, within this thing that we've created, this thought form that we're living in called a body, we must strive for the form which existed before the laying down of heaven and earth, in God's creation of us as a spiritual being in the beginning. That's the form that we are trying to revitalize, awaken.
I think the text is saying, it speaks so frequently of without interruption and the 100 days or something. I think it's saying that if we persist, there is the transformation. It's not as though you meditate, you have a good experience, you're different. But we're talking here about a lifetime or a commitment over time with the continued meditation. Then we have a chance to do what you're asking about. Otherwise, it's doubtful.
Look at this business, the next sentence. If today people sit and meditate only 1 or 2 hours, looking only at their own egos, and call this reflection, how can anything come of it? This is right on the nose, and it hits most of us right on the nose, because our meditations are ego reflections sometimes. We just stew around in our own juice, and it's kind of tragic. That's what we do, just turn round and round.
The contrast between whatever exciting experiences we might have with this desire to strive to be conformed to the image of God in which we were made as souls in the beginning. See, the paragraph is contrasting those two aspirations. But you see, there is a point that there are negative forms of meditation. How many of you have read in our book, Search for God, the little section prior to chapter 1, which is called Meditation? All right, about 2/3 of you. In that, there's a section that says, if one were directed by the pituitary alone for a period of 7 years, you could become a light to the world, or a Frankenstein. Now, why does it say, or a Frankenstein? You see, if there's the singleness of purpose, but it is not selfless, and I think you have this in a man like Hitler or anyone who rises to great power, the singleness of purpose will enable you to do fantastic things. but it will just having singleness of purpose does not necessarily. See, we have 7 centers, 7 motivational potentials. The more you get those going in the same direction, or to the extent that you can get all 7 major motivational potentials going in one direction, then tremendous power can flow, but it can be for self. Let's see. Looking at their own egos, I think part of that is what Lynn was talking about, is all of the movies of the experiences that can come. Dozens of people that I've talked with about meditation have begun to have those brilliant experiences and are just really reluctant to give them up. They're just so convinced that constitutes progress that they want to stay on that movie track. And I think that's also part of it. It's not the own ego just with respect to the present life, but rather the whole lower self and all of the patterns related to that.
It's much better TV show than anything that's on now.
We have a psychology going about these days that advocates getting in touch with your feelings. You've got to get in touch with that. Well, you start getting in touch with that, you may be in touch with a karmic pattern that's 17 incarnations old. You know, there's no sort of pursuing that to its end and clarifying it. The whole idea is not to get up on that karmic track.
That's the desire pattern that I talked about a while ago. One who attends to desires instead of stimulates all that feeling business with the desire.
42. The 2 founders of Buddhism and Taoism have taught that one should look at the tip of one's nose, but they did not mean that one should fasten one's thought to the tip of the nose. Neither did they mean that while the eyes were looking at the tip of the nose, the thoughts should be concentrated on the yellow middle. Wherever the eye looks, the heart is directed also. How can it be directed at the same time upward, the yellow middle, and downward, the tip of the nose, or alternatively, so that it is now up, now down? All that means confusing the finger with which one points to the moon with the moon itself. Wherever the eye looks, the heart is directed also. What is that?
Spirit and heart.
Intention.
Follows desire.
The earthly heart follows the desire. I think that's true. There are 2 eyes here. There is this eye. And you can't look at a form or a color or a movement without the whole motivational system of the body following that. Television, a movie, as the eye dwells on a certain kind of action, the body responds to that, does it not? So as this eye is related to this eye, insofar as we allow the physical eye to invest in something that quickens the flow of the energy that directs what happens to the endocrine system.
This is called vicarious enjoyment. When you watch violence and enjoy it, because you need some experience of violence. So when you watch love scenes and passion and this sort of thing, you need to invest yourself in that and feel it, sense it. It's vicariously that we take on a lot of this stuff, and it becomes dangerous at that point because it turns us all up. You need to gradually cut off a lot of the negatives that you deal with. This is the practical approach to getting away from it. But the other, I think that spiritual eye ought to be commented on too, because when we're using that one, then we got another operation going.
Now this whole section is going to deal with sort of where you put the eyes, literally, where you put the consciousness. And there are approaches to meditation that sort of have you roll the eyes backward, up, and sort of concentrate back here. It's warning against that, and yet there's sort of an advocation of it, I think. The consciousness is there, but it's not as though you try to sort of force yourself to focus on it. The eyes are down, following the tip of the nose, and yet the consciousness is centered here, and yet it is not as though you sort of force that consciousness. Now, I've done some laboratory research with the brainwave, the EEG, and I've observed what happens when the eyes are positioned here and what happens when they roll back. With the rolling back of the consciousness, there's the dispersion of the consciousness, the integration of the brainwave, and it's a drifting off into fantasy. It's accompanied by that. Whereas the focusing of the eyes is accompanied by more alertness, attentiveness, and directed. Now this approach to meditation, like the approach of the reading, is a directed meditation. It's not a drifting. There are, some might say, reasons for doing different kinds of practices. This is a focused one. And therefore the eyes are focused. And as the eyes are focused, something different happens to the brainwave pattern. It's integrated. Then there's we'll read these, but let's be aware of what we're talking about. Not only the position of the eyes, but the position of the motivation, the heavenly heart, as well as the physiological structure.
I think this is the great advantage of the meditation, the kind of affirmations that are suggested by the readings. And I think this is his bridging from the Eastern into the Western focus. because these affirmations, if you go over them carefully, all 24 of them in the search for God, are very clear statements of ideals, of spiritual ideals and purpose. And they move you from one point to another. There's a spiritual movement in them. So that when you focus that heavenly eye, so to speak, these affirmations begin to quicken and awaken that original spiritual memory of the self, the spiritual self. And the soul begins to percolate, so to speak. It makes very good coffee when it does. You begin to wake up, and then it begins to take over, and you express the will of God, what you came here to do, to serve. And it changes, you change. So the affirmation is so important, I think, in this bridging process of quickening the consciousness and keeping it focused. It's not an abstraction. It's not a drifting. It's a very, as Herb says, a very focused, but it's focused on spiritual concepts, spiritual ideals that are held. What then is really meant by this? The expression tip of the nose is very cleverly chosen. The nose must serve the eyes as a guideline. If one is not guided by the nose, either one opens wide the eyes and looks into the distance so that the nose is not seen, or the lids shut too much so that the eyes close, and again the nose is not seen. But when the eyes are open, this is just a little bit of opening, are open too wide, one makes the mistake of directing them outward. Thereby one easily is distracted. If they're closed too much, one makes the mistake of letting them turn inward. Thereby one easily sinks into a dreamy reverie, and you go to sleep. Only when the eyelids are lowered properly, halfway, is the tip of the nose seen in just the right way. This is a very technical approach to the nose. Therefore, it is taken as a guideline. The main thing is to lower the eyelids in the right way and then allow the light to stream in of itself without effort, wanting the light to stream in concentratedly. Looking at the tip of the nose serves only as the beginning of the inner concentration, so that the eyes are brought into the right direction for looking and then are held to the guideline. After that, one can let it be. That is the way a mason hangs up a plumb line. As soon as he has hung it up, he guides his work by it without continually bothering himself to look at the plumb line. This is a nice explanation of this. It's a starting point. And you've tried this, I'm sure. I've practiced on it for quite a while, trying to figure out what is going on here. And it's not a wide opening. As it says, if you open the eyes too wide, then you see too much. If you close them completely, then you don't get the little point of concentration that you can start from. But it's only a starting point. Then you let these other things happen. It's a very tricky procedure, but it's a technicality that they practice for thousands of years, and it works for, as I said frequently, unless you've had half a dozen Chinese incarnations, you're going to have trouble with this anyway. But if you have had, you practice some of this, and you sort of go back to it and pick it up and start with it again, I think. It's very interesting. You may want to comment on that, Herb. Such a technicality.
There may be rare occasions when it's appropriate to try to meditate while you're lying down. I think that this time, more than any other, you will notice that there's a tendency for the eyes to roll backward and you drift off into reverie. The readings say if you meditate lying down, always have the hands across the solar plexus. But if you will observe when you're lying down, if you try to meditate, the difference that it makes, whether the eyes are positioned and held forward here or whether you allow them to roll back. The minute they roll back, brainwave synchrony is changed. You're drifting off into a reverie kind of state, as it says here, a dreamy reverie.
I used to try to meditate lying down, and I'd go to sleep. I drifted right on off, fast, like that. So one morning I got myself by the back of my neck and dragged myself into the bathroom and turned on a cold shower. And it scared my body so that it hasn't let me...
Try to meditate lying down.
No, it just scared me right out of it. I've been sitting up ever since. The back needs to be straight, by the way, from the tip of the head to the base of the spine, and that will enable you to sit that way indefinitely without any real discomfort. It's very interesting. You can balance yourself, but you got to get it nice and balanced, right? That energy is hard enough moving without having to go around a curve. So if you can get it straight, it helps. Yeah.
Lots of questions, all right?
How can you concentrate without effort?
Meditation is a letting process. It is not a forcing process. Meditation takes place from within. It doesn't take place from without. Prayer is a concentration of the conscious mind. But meditation is an inner experience, and it happens from inside. And it starts out with this, if you remember right in the beginning, talking about the letting and non-letting. You let it happen. It's a letting process, the meditate, and it's a movement that takes place within the self. And it moves automatically if you let it. And what diverts it constantly is the attention running all over the place. It's a busy body wanting to move, do something, jump up and down, sit in a better chair, getting tired, getting thirsty, all kind of crazy things. Or the mind jumping around all over the place, the pictures coming in and getting in the way. It's the aversion that stops you. If you get quiet, then it'll happen. And it's a letting process. You just have to keep returning to a point. And I think the point to return to is that affirmation. Then it happens. You let it happen. You don't force it.
So what I get is that you're saying is that meditation is effortless, but concentration still requires effort.
If you want to call it concentration, but what concentration on what?
Well, that's what the word in concentration and meditation are two different.
They sure are. They sure are. They're quite different.
Where concentration, if I'm trying to concentrate on learning a math problem or solving something, that's a lot of concentration.
Yeah, well, this is not concentration. It's a letting process from within.
There are a lot of things where trying too hard gets in the way.
Yeah.
A golf swing or there's just many things in which it's extremely important to do everything right, and the more you kind of concentrate on doing it yourself, the less it happens. So there's a point of commitment, like a diver who's going to do a 2.5 forward flip off the high diving board. There's a point of concentration, and then there's a point of relief. But I think it may help if you will get a sense it is not I who must meditate properly, but the Spirit meditates me. And that's why Hewlin is saying letting it. Letting is permitting the attunement to take place instead of trying to crunch everything in position when it won't fit.
Let me try a little fiddle-de-do with you on the affirmation. You start with words. Now, after you've worked with that affirmation for a while, and consciously with a group, you could discuss it. What are the meanings of the various words until you get a kind of meaning out of the total affirmation. And then you no longer have to bother with the words. You work with the meaning, and you go with that meaning. After a little while, for me, I don't know whether it's happened for anybody else, I get a feeling with the meaning. I get an experience or kind of thing with the meaning. And then I go with that. And it moves right along then. Now, I caught myself once examining an affirmation, and I was working on the words, and to hold them, I decided I was going to see them on the head of a pin, kind of thing. I was going to get them all there in one. And it's an interesting effort to try to see a whole affirmation. You can do it. It really can do it, just as if you saw them on the head of a pin, the whole thing. But you know what I caught myself doing at that point? I was examining how high the raised letters were on it, and I'd put them on a plaque and engraved them, and I was examining and measuring how high they were. I had gotten caught on the affirmation. I'd gotten caught on the words. I'd gotten caught on the form that I was solidifying it in brass, and I was stuck right there. I wasn't going with the meaning. I wasn't going with I'd gotten stuck there. So I've been trying to find a way to get away from that engraving them, and measuring how deep, be sure I had them all an inch high properly. It's very funny what your mind will do, but it does some strange things to get your attention. It doesn't let you go off in meditation. It wants you to meditate. It wants you to think about it, about the body. It wants a little food, a little pleasure, a little this and that and the other. And it keeps grabbing you and pulling you. And it's letting it go, letting loose. That's the way that affirmation could be handled like that if you try.
The word meditation that we have come to value may have led us to devalue the word prayer. And I'd like to go back to this expression, we pray to meditate and meditate to pray. On the one hand, you sit down and you're going to meditate, and you may find that you're just not there. There are worries, concerns, preoccupation. Someone has said a harsh word to you, or you're worried about indebtedness, or someone in the family is ill, or you're worried about what's happening in your own life. And there can be a period there of prayer, and there are a lot of very effective ways to pray. One of the most effective ways to pray is to start being thankful. Just begin to enumerate the things which there are, and I find I can go back all the way to childhood. There's a long list of things that every one of us could be thankful for genuinely, for the protection we've had, the opportunities we had, the friendships, the love, and so on. And as you put aside worries, start in this spirit of prayer, then suddenly you find yourself still, and you get a sense, now I can meditate. But there are times you can't just sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to meditate. The Lord's Prayer, breathing exercise, and here we go, here's the affirmation, and now the silence.
Nothing happens.
And you say, hey, wait, where's the silence? No, it's not there. Then, sometimes you sit down and you're there. If you've been meditating a while, you sit down and all of a sudden you feel that centeredness, and you may slavishly say, oh, I've got to do my preparation breathing first. This is no. Once it's there, you rise with it. You go with that. And so this is not giving so much effort to it, but it's finding that place of stillness. And then what is so important is that the stillness has to be directed. It's got to be a quickened stillness and a directed stillness. It can't just be, at that point, that's the crucial moment. Because at this time, you start building. Now, what are you going to build? At this time, the energy can flow. What pattern is it going to flow through? That's the critical time. Then, the whole idea is, why meditate anyway? There's only a couple of good reasons. One, because we want to change, and we want to change so that we can help others more fully. So, we meditate so that we can pray more effectively. Then it's the different kind of prayer, in which, after that moment of attunement, for the first time, our prayers have a chance of rising higher than the ceiling. So, Hughlin, how many people do you suppose you've talked to about meditation in the past, say, 30 years?
God, I don't know. I've never stopped talking about it after I got started.
But I mean, how many have come to you personally with questions or problems?
Great many.
Hundreds?
Hundreds. Oh, yes.
See, here's some experience that we don't ordinarily have of getting to talk to people deeply about this. Now, part of what Hughlin has observed is people have gotten themselves into trouble beginning to meditate. Some approaches say, start meditating, the rest will follow. The readings say, know where you're going before you start out. Now, one of the things that's not ordinarily considered in our approach to meditation is that we've had many lifetimes. And most of us, the very fact that we're in this room at this time suggests that we have had lifetimes in religious orders, or we may have been Catholics or Buddhist meditators or something. We've sought the spiritual path somewhere. And there are some of those things. Imagine someone who was a Buddhist meditator for a lifetime, or a Catholic priest or a nun for a lifetime. And suddenly they sit down, they're introduced to a new practice, and the whole thing unfolds. But that's like a person who has a lifetime, maybe 50 years old and dissipated in body, and has a lifetime in which he remembers he was a great athlete, and so he goes out and he's going to run a 4-minute mile, right? We have potential in the soul and the previous life experience that can unfold, for which we do not have the present body. We haven't prepared ourselves to have those energies flow through it. And so, this first little section on meditation in Search for God says it's like a person entering a power plant. And we don't take that seriously. But you can go in there, and all of a sudden some energy starts flowing. Powerful energy. Sometimes the person sits down, the first time you meditate, that energy goes zooming up, and they have all kinds of experiences. And they may be discoordinated about that or fearful about that for years following. Then we say there are preliminary steps. We began to put our lives in order. We began to set ideals. We began to work with affirmations that direct the consciousness and the motivation. Know where you're going before you start out. Prepare yourself before you invite those energies to flow. Make haste slowly.
Yeah, there's an example of this. I started out fairly early with meditation and really chugged right ahead with it, worked on it. This started back in college, and the sexual drives that I had just blew me right out of the water as a result of the meditation. I mean, they were just... this power plant operation that Herb's talking about, I wasn't ready to handle that stuff. I mean, at that level, just tremendous. And I didn't know what was happening to me. It scared the living daylights out of me because it was so much stronger, and it had been bad enough before. But it got a lot worse very quickly, and I backed off and began to talk to Dad about it. I mean, the whole business was really very interesting there, and you do have to work, with ideals and goals and purposes before you know what you're headed toward. That's what Herb is saying here, and it's so important, because just meditate, without any direction, without any purpose for what you want to accomplish, where you're going. You can blow yourself into real interesting situations. It describes it later on here. We're going to get to it tomorrow next day.
The previous life experiences set a tremendous stage for what you're going to begin to experience. Now, and those may be easily tapped, or they may be deeply buried, but for some, they're right on the surface. And the minute that person goes into a kind of spiritual practice, some energy may flow. And they have a kind of aptitude, but that aptitude means all the more care must be taken. Some of us have sealed that over more and protected ourselves more. It unfolds more gradually, so we have time to get our lives in order a little bit as the growth goes along. So we just do not recommend immediately start meditating without some preparation or direction.
We make use of this in a tremendous fashion, I think, in the study group program, because by bringing people together regularly in weekly sessions and asking them to pray for each other and meditate together during the week each day and then meditate together at the meeting, this energy begins to flow, and it flows wherever is needed, and there's healing. Physical, emotional, mental, quickening of spiritual stimulation. As a result of that, a sharing kind of process. And it's directed, you see, by the ideals that are expressed in those affirmations that each essay, each lesson is working with. And so it's guided in that sense. It has a purpose. It has direction. And that's what keeps these groups living, growing, and changing, people changing in them. 1,700 of these things throughout the United States. This is why they're working. They are producing changes in people's lives. Through them, they're able to get healing, and they're able to serve at the same time. There's the protection and the healing, and then it begins to radiate out in their lives.
Let me make a suggestion. Next time that happens, try with an inhalation to raise it up, and then with the exhalation, sense it coming from your forehead instead of from your heart. Try to raise that flow up and direct it. The reason say disseminate it from the pituitary. See it disseminated from there. You can do that with the breath. You can breathe it up.
If the leaky thymus, you know, you could slosh around all over the place.